Hello, I'm Erik Wait, and I'm a certified sommelier with the Court of Master Sommeliers, a French wine scholar at the Wine Scholar Guild. I'm also a certified whiskey ambassador. I have a diploma from the Edinburgh Whisky Academy, and I want to tell you about 10 wines that every whiskey lover should know. Well, bourbon casks make up about 90% of all casks in Scotland. That other 10% is made up of wine casks or rum casks. But other whiskeys are aged in wine casks as well, including American bourbons and Irish whiskeys. So number 10 is the Sauternes cask. Sauternes is a French sweet wine from the Sauternes region of Grave region in Bordeaux, made from Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and the Moscatel grapes that have been affected by Botrytis cinerea, also known as noble rot. Basically, a fog comes into the region which causes a rot on the grapes, but then the sun comes out, which evaporates and leaves the botrytis, which is a little fungus, to suck away the moisture out of the grapes, which then concentrates the sugar. This causes the grapes to become partially raisined, resulting in concentrated, distinctively flavored wines. Due to its climate, Sauternes is one of the few wine regions where infection with noble rot is a frequent occurrence. And these are very age-worthy wines. This is a young wine, 2011 Chateau Purguy, and you can see it is a nice golden in color. This one, however, which is getting a lot more sort of orangey caramel tannin color, this is a 2001, a 21-year-old Chateau de Reine Vigneux. But I could sit on these wines for another 10, 20, 30 years and they still would be absolutely fantastic. In fact, they grow in complexity. So typical aromas and flavors they contribute to a whiskey include honey, orange marmalade, canned peaches, and a lot of floral notes. They tend to be very sweet, but not cloying because they have high acidity. They're full-bodied alcohol, 13 to 13.5% alcohol by volume, and tend to have medium to high acidity. Well, how common are these Sauternes cask whiskies? Well, here are just a few. The Aran single malt Scotch Sauternes cask, the Ben Riach 15-year-old Sauternes cask Highland single malt Scotch whiskey, the Cotswold Sauternes cask, the Glenmorangie, the Nectar d'Or Highland single malt Scotch whiskey, and the Kilchoman Sauternes cask Islay single malt Scotch whiskey, and the Tullibardine 225 Sauternes cask Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. So next wine you're going to want to know is the Moscatel Muscat or Moscato wine. The Muscat family of grapes includes over 200 grape varieties. Their colors range from white, such as the Muscat Autumnal, to yellow, such as the Moscato Ghiaccio, to pink, such as the Moscato Rosa del Trentino, to near black, the Muscat Hamburg. Other varieties include Muscat et Petit Grain and the Muscat of Alexandria. Muscat grapes and wines almost always have a pronounced sweet floral aroma and often with flavors of orange and honey. You could almost think of sweet Muscat as sort of like the poor man's Sauternes, but it's not just still wines. They also make a sparkling wine called Muscat d'Asti. While they are often special limited release bottlings, here are a few Muscat whiskeys just to name a few. The Deanston 19-year-old Muscat cask finished Highland single malt Scotch whiskey, the Teeling 15-year-old Muscat finished Irish single malt Scotch whiskey, the Glenallachie 11-year-old Moscatel finished Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey, and the Tomatin 15-year-old Moscato finished Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. Now the next one up is probably my favorite wine, Pinot Noir. Whether you're talking about California, the Willamette Valley of Oregon, or Burgundy, or even New Zealand, Pinot Noir is one of my favorites because it is one of the most food-friendly wines, but also one of the most challenging to make. Pinot Noir is a dry red wine, medium to medium plus in body, 13.5 to 14.5% alcohol by volume, tends to have very low to medium tannin, making it very food-friendly with both fish and meats, and it tends to have medium plus to high acidity. Top regions include Burgundy, California along the coast, the Russian River, Los Caneros, and in Oregon, the Willamette Valley. While they're often special limited release bottlings, here are a few whiskeys aged in Pinot Noir casks. The Glenmorangie Burgundy cask from 2004, the Longrow Red 12-year-old Pinot Noir, Campbellton single malt Scotch whiskey, the Tullibardine, a Burgundy cask Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. And for a combination of Pinot Noir and smoke and peat, here's my favorite, the Ardbeg Black. Now, what kind of flavors can you expect from a Pinot Noir cask? Typically, I get a lot of chocolate-covered cherries or bright red fruit notes. The next wine that every whiskey lover should get to know is Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, this category of Cabernet Sauvignon also includes Cabernet Franc, which is the parent grape of Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon is the result of Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc getting together and producing Cabernet Sauvignon. But when you're drinking Cabernet Sauvignon or Cabernet Franc, it isn't necessarily going to be 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. Depending on the region that you're getting your Cabernet Sauvignon from, it may have also a little bit of Merlot in it to sort of soften the tannins. Cabernet Sauvignon has medium to medium plus tannins, tends to be dry, medium to medium plus in body with 13.5 to 14.5% alcohol by volume, and that ages really well. Classic regions include Bordeaux, particularly the left bank, California, including the Napa Valley, Sonoma, and Paso Robles, or for more affordable options, try Chile. Whiskey bottlings include Glenmorangie Cabernet Cask, the Green Spot Chateau Léovaux Barton, and the Longueuil 11 Cabernet Cask. The Green Spot Chateau Léovaux Barton Single Pot Irish Whiskey is one of my favorites. The next on the list is Amarone, or also known as Amarone della Valpolicella. It is a wine made with partially dried grapes in the Valpolicella Veneto, northeast Italy. There are 3 geographical subzones: Classical, Valpatina, and the Extended Zone. It is a rich, full-bodied wine. Alcohol tends to be around 15% alcohol by volume. It is dry and very tannic. It is made from partially dried grapes called appassamento. Appassamento is the method of partially drying out grapes, which are then slowly pressed and slowly fermented to make Amarone. Specifically, the Corvina grape, 45 to 95%, Rodinella, 5 to 30%, and other approved red grape varieties up to 25%. Typical aromas and flavors Amarone contributes to whiskey include raspberry, cherry compote, dark plum, dried fig, and nutty notes with a little bit of sweet spice. Now, there aren't a lot of Amarone cask finished whiskeys out there. However, Arran makes quite a few, such as the Arran Malt Amarone cask. And a hard-to-find Irish whiskey would include the Teeling 10-year-old Amarone cask. The next wine on our list is Marsala. Marsala is a fortified wine, dry or sweet, produced in the region surrounding the Italian city of Marsala in Sicily. It is made predominantly from the Grillo, Inzolia, Catarato, and Damasceno white grape varietals. It is a rich and full-bodied wine at about 17% alcohol by volume, may be dry or sweet, and have low to medium acidity. It is also commonly used in cooking dishes such as chicken marsala. While there are often special limited release bottlings, here are just a few Marsala cask whiskies. The Arran Marsala cask, the Deanston 15-year-old Marsala cask whiskey, the Napo Castle 12-year-old Marsala cask Irish whiskey, the Leipzig 19-year-old Marsala single malt Scotch whiskey, the Tullibardine, the Murray Marsala cask single malt Scotch whiskey. Here's one that I brought back from Islay myself. This is the Bunnahabhain 13-year-old Marsala cask. And the next one that every whiskey lover should get to know is Madeira. Madeira is a fortified wine made on the Portuguese Madeira Islands off the coast of Africa. Madeira is produced in a variety of styles ranging from dry wines which can be consumed on their own or as an aperitif to sweet wines usually consumed with dessert. Approximately 85% of Madeira is produced with the red grape Negra Mora. The 4 major white grape varieties used for Madeira production are, from driest to sweetest, Cercial, Verdejo, Boal, and Malmsey. The islands of Madeira have a long winemaking history dating back to the age of exploration, approximately from the end of the 15th century, when Madeira was a standard port of call for ships heading to the New World or East Indies. To prevent wine from spoiling, a neutral grape spirit was added. On the long sea voyages, the wines would be exposed to excessive heat and movement which transformed the flavor of the wine. This was discovered by wine producers of Madeira when an unsold shipment of wine returned to the islands after a round trip. Today, Madeira is noted for its unique winemaking process, which involves oxidizing the wine through heat and aging it in heated rooms called estufum or heated tanks. Typical aromas and flavors derived from Madeira include peaches, caramel, walnuts, hazelnut, orange peel, and burnt sugar. And these wines are near impervious to destruction. This is a 15-year-old Boal, cost me about $17 from Henriquez and Henriquez. I could open this wine today, put the cork back into it, come back to it 10, 15, 20 years later, and it'll still be good. Whiskey bottlings include the Balvenie 21-year-old Madeira cask, the Glenmorangie Madeira cask from 2006, the Glendalough Madeira cask Irish whiskey, and the Tyrconnell 10-year-old Madeira cask. And there are a lot more Madeira cask whiskeys out there. These are just a few. And the next wine on our list is port. Port wine, also known as Vinho do Porto, is a Portuguese fortified wine produced in the Douro Valley of northern Portugal. It is typically a sweet red wine, often served as a dessert wine, although it also comes in dry, semi-dry, and white varieties. Now, there are a lot of American wines that are called port, but a lot of times they're not even made with the traditional port grapes, so I like to stick to the original, such as this Taylor Fladgate 10-year-old tawny port wine. Over 100 varieties of grapes are sanctioned for port production, although only 5, Tinta Barroca, Tinta Cao, Tinta Roriz, also known as Tempranillo, Touriga Francisca, and Touriga Nacional are widely cultivated and used. There are a number of different types of port, including the Cojita, Ruby, Tawny, Vintage, and the late bottled vintage. And typically port casks contribute a lot of dark black fruity notes to a whiskey. Port can be sort of over domineering on a whiskey, so I prefer whiskeys, if they're going to use port, that go gently with it, because pretty soon it can just taste like you're tasting a whiskey that just had some port poured into it. While they're often special limited releases, here are just a few port cask whiskeys. Angel's Envy Port Cask Bourbon, the Arran Port Cask Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, the Glenmorangie 14-year-old Quinta Reuben Highland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, the Talisker Port Cask Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, and the Tomatin 14-year-old Highland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Now, once you open a bottle of port, it can last a really long time. Not as long as Madeira. You need to store it quickly. But this is a 1966 Taylor Fladgate port that I opened on my 50th birthday 5 years ago, and it is still tasting fresh. Our next wine that every whiskey lover should get to know is Pedro Ximenez, also known as PX. Pedro Ximenez is a white Spanish wine grape variety known in several Spanish wine regions, but most notably in the Montilla Morelos east of the Jerez Triangle. It is an intensely sweet, dark dessert sherry made by drying the grapes under the hot sun, concentrating the sweetness similar to straw wine production, which are then used to create a full-bodied 17% alcohol by volume, thick black liquid with a strong taste of raisins and molasses that is fortified and then aged in a solera. But these wines aren't cheap. This one, which is a 375, this is a No Vinum Optimum Rare Signature Pedro Ximenez, was probably around 60 bucks when I originally bought it. It has been opened, but it still tastes great. So like Madeira, you can open them and they're not going to go bad right away. Whiskey bottlings include the Glengoyne PX cask, Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, the Cavalan Soloist PX cask, the Lefroy PX cask, Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. From India, you have the Paul John PX cask and the Rampur PX Sherry cask, Single Malt Indian Whiskey. But one of my favorites is the Ardbeg and O Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Now, one of the things about PX cask is, kind of like port, PX can be sort of a domineering flavor, so I tend to look for whiskeys in which the PX plays an undernote rather than a domineering character that's going to completely take over the whiskey. So a little bit of PX will go a long way. Now, the 10th wine that every whiskey lover should get to know is Oloroso Sherry. Now, there are a lot of whiskeys out there aged in sherry casks, and they don't get specific as to what type of sherry there is. There is Oloroso Sherry, Fino Sherry, Amontillado, Palo Cantado, Pedro Ximenez. So, usually though, it's going to be Oloroso unless they specify that it is some other kind of sherry. Because Oloroso is so common, they just sort of assume, okay, this is the flavor profile you're looking for. Most use Oloroso, So we don't need to specify Oloroso because the whiskey consumer might not know what it is, of course, unless they watch my channel. So we're just going to put sherry. But there are other kinds which I also would recommend checking out, such as this Moscatel Amontillado. Oloroso sherry is a variety of fortified wine made in the Jerez and Montemorelos regions of Spain, produced by oxidative aging through a fractional blending system process known as a solera. Whereas the Pedro Ximenez wine is made from the Pedro Ximenez grape, Oloroso is made from the Palomino grape from vines grown on Albariza soil. Unlike Fino and Amontillado sherries, in Oloroso, the flor yeast is suppressed by fortification at an earlier stage. This causes the finished wine to lack the fresh yeasty taste of the Fino sherries. Without the layer of flora, the sherry is exposed to air through the slightly porous walls of the American or Canadian oak cask and undergoes oxidative aging. As the wine ages, it becomes darker and stronger and is often left for many decades. Oloroso wines tend to be very dark, nutty, and full-bodied with alcohols of 17 to 22% alcohol by volume. Typical aromas and flavors that contribute to whiskey include dates, figs, and raisins. Whiskey bottlings include the Angel's Envy Oloroso Cask Bourbon, Chivas Regal Oloroso Blended Scotch Whiskey, the Deanston 21-year-old Highland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, the Glendronach 18-year-old Allardyce Highland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, from Campbellton, the Hazelburn 14-year-old Oloroso Cask Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Then we have the Catalan Soloist Oloroso Single Malt Whiskey from Taiwan. And here's a special bottling for you bourbon lovers. This is the Wild Turkey Revival Oloroso Cask Finished Bourbon. And one more sherry cask whiskey for good measure. This is the Kilchoman Loch Gorm, heavily sherried and heavily peated Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like watching my content, you've not yet subscribed, actually become a subscriber. And I want to thank all my Patreons for supporting this channel. Until next time, cheers. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.